Hello everybody and welcome to 3 Colors Up. In this one we're going to be having a go at the Vogelspinne for the Axis faction for Warlord Games' Konflikt 47. This is a nice plastic kit that we've previously covered in a little bit of a build video and also been involved in using for the basing material for our linebacker tutorial as well. A lot of you guys enjoyed that one. So this one is going to be a bit more sort of, the vibe is kind of improvised camouflage. I do explain it as I go along because I really wanted it to look like it's just been built in the factory and they've just got whatever paint they could and just made whatever pattern they could. So it's a little bit chaotic in places, but I think overall it turns out quite well. So hopefully you enjoy watching this one. Let's just get stuck in. So here I have my Vogelspinne, and you can see I have it sort of posed slightly, so if it was sat on the ground it's kind of leaning over a little bit, and I kind of wanted it to lean over because I put these twin autocannons on it, wanted it to lean over to look like it's manipulating the whole body to engage something off to one side. It looked interesting to me. That's kind of where I was going with it. I didn't want it to just stand still and just, you know, not be doing anything interesting. What I've done is prime the model in grey Seer. Obviously, like, this would be the equivalent to an army painter ash grey, sort of similar tone. But I wanted the grey tone in this because we're going to go quite bright. We're going to make it stand out a little bit. So let's, for this, because we're going to be base coating it now, we're going to take the turret off. As you can see, it's not primed properly all the way through. But we should be able to, hopefully carefully, take our turret off, which we can, and we're going to start base coating. So what I'm going to do is a little bit different. We're going Molten Orange from the air range for this. This is basically because it looks almost exactly like red oxide, and that's going to be the base coat for everything else that we do. I have it in my airbrush, and yep, we're just going to get stuck in. And we want to work this up in several layers to make sure it's nice and smooth. So we have our Molten Orange down, as you can see, and that has given us a very interesting, nice sort of red oxide kind of colour. What I've done then is placed the turret back on, put the guns to the front and put them down into their sort of rested, sort of lowest position. That's because we're going to do a camouflage pattern over the top of this. My thinking is that the machine has come out of the factory, they're trying to rush these things out, so they're just running them out in the red oxide, and when they get to the unit, they're just trying to camouflage them as best they can with whatever colours they have either left or colours they have available. So they're not going to be repainting the whole thing, they're going to be incorporating this red oxide into the colour scheme that they come up with. That's a historical reference, as well as how I imagine Konflikt 47 vehicles being pushed out, particularly by the Axis powers. They're bringing up this new tech and they're throwing it out as fast as possible. So historically relevant and visually interesting. So we're going to move on to formulating up a camouflage scheme. And I'm first going to go with charred bone. We're going to use charred bone through the airbrush as a little bit of sort of create a pattern. And I'm not quite sure what sort of pattern I want to go for. Kind of thinking a crisscross pattern with maybe a third colour in the middle, sort of play on that typical World War II 3-tone kind of thing, but just make it look a little different. So we have it in the airbrush, and this really is just a suck it and see what we come up with. So we're going to test the airbrush out first. Make sure we have a nice fine bead on the airbrush. And I'm thinking just going crisscross, so we'll try crisscross. You can see sort of what I'm trying to aim for here, just these sort of wavy diagonal lines. So let's continue that. With the charred bone stripes now in, we're going to move on to another colour, Gremlin green, and we're going to use that as little patches of little splotches in between some of those crisscross areas. So just going to make sure the brush is ready. This is quite a bright, interesting green. So yeah, let's see what happens. So it looks a bit like a pizza topping right now, but we will hopefully tone a lot of this down through weathering and through other bits and bobs. It's a different take on a typical 3-tone. I think the colours are quite bright, but once the weathering and stuff like that is done, it should look a bit more interesting. However, we're going to let it all dry because it is quite a slow drying paint, this air stuff. So once it's all dry, we'll come back and start picking out areas where we might actually just repaint that base red oxide again to make it look like parts have been replaced or have just arrived from the factory and they've just been chucked onto the thing. That's where the visual interest for me is going to come from this model, is just adding those little bits of improvisation to the build of the actual vehicle. And then after that we can get into some of the other base coating sort of detail parts. So we have a lot of mechanical stuff going on there and a few other bits and bobs. But we'll let it dry and then we'll move on. With the camouflage having been left to dry for a while, I went in after that and repainted a couple of pieces in our base molten orange. And that's the ring around the turret and this little hatch up front and a couple of little dots here on either side of the turret. So that's, well, and also these two little bottles on the back of the hull. But that's all I've done back into the base primer. I didn't want to ruin the whole thing too much by adding a whole ton of it. There is quite a lot of the red visible anyway, so those areas just look a bit more interesting now they've been solidified back to that base colour again. What we're going to move on to now is a little bit of sponge chipping, and for that I'm going to be using Brigadine Brown. Brigadine Brown. Blah, blah, blah. And this will be the same approach as what we did with the linebacker. So I'm going to put some onto a little palette up here on the top of the screen. And I have a little piece of sponge that I've taken from a blister box. This is a bit thinner than I'm used to, so it might actually give me a bit more accuracy or just might confound me entirely. So what I want to do is focus on the edges with the sponge. And I'm going to try and avoid some of the areas that I've just painted back into the base primer color. So we might even just pull the turret off there so we don't accidentally hit that. And we can go a little bit heavier on the areas that have our camouflage on it, just to make the vehicle look like it's been heavily used, abused, thrown around. And what this helps to do as well is break the effect of the camouflage and bring the shape of the model back in. So the heavier we go with this, in theory, the more definition we're going to get out of the model, because it is quite an interesting and quite a complex shape. And I think it would be a waste to hide that under our very improvised looking camouflage scheme. So what we do is we go around that, we just find areas that might just benefit from a bit of high wear and tear. The chipping, or the brown part of the chipping, is now done, and you can see that that has helped quite a lot to bring back the shape of the mech, just by defining those edges a little better. And now it's time to move on to the next thing. As you can see, we've also put our turret back into the position that we're going to keep it in now, because I don't believe we need to remove it for anything else. What we're moving on to now is using some plate mail metal from the Fanatic range. This is going to be part of the silver chipping process, same as the linebacker, as well as painting in the metallic components. So if you've seen the linebacker tutorial, then we're basically covering similar grounds here. So what we're doing is taking a lot of paint off our brush, and this brush is kind of an old brush. You can see the bristles are kind of messed up on it. And what we want to do is just use it to lightly add in some silver to some of the chipped areas. Maybe taking a bit too much paint off the brush there. And this is to help add to the effect and make it look like the silver areas are sort of more recent damage on top of the stuff that's the brown color, which is a bit more older and starting to rust a little bit. So once we have that done, as you can see there, it's starting to look all right along that edge. Once we have that done, we'll do a little bit onto the primed, the newer looking parts, just the silver. Then we'll paint our guns, and we'll paint the hydraulics that are on the legs as well. Maybe a few of the smaller details, like some of these little pieces here on the back, maybe something on the ammunition hopper, I'm not too sure yet. But it's a simple base coating step once I have this second layer of weathering put down. So we'll come back once that's all done, and then we can move on. So as I mentioned before, off camera I did the rest of the metallic chipping and then painted the metallic parts. I also went ahead and gave the whole model a fairly heavy airbrush coat of a gloss varnish. Any gloss varnish will do. You'll have seen that process as well in the linebacker video. So we're still sort of on track with doing a similar kind of scheme. So from this point, we're going to start applying an enamel wash. And like in the linebacker, I'm going with a Villany ink, but this time I'm going with Dystopian brown, so a little bit of a different tone. So I have my palette in the background here. I'm going to put a couple drops of that onto my palette, and I'm going to learn from the linebacker, and immediately I'm going to bring in my thinners here as well, and I'm going to use a broader brush to apply it. So what I'm doing is dipping my brush into the thinners and then getting a good bit of that thinned down and onto the brush, and then applying it. Because we have a gloss varnish, should be fairly straightforward. It'll want to cling to detail and sort of accentuate the shapes, hopefully cling to the likes of the rivets and that sort of thing. So I'm just dabbing it on. I'm not really going to take a lot of time applying this. I think it's just going to be a case of let the gloss varnish and the enamel just do its thing and gather where it wants to. Now that the wash has had plenty of time to dry, we see we've got a little bit more interest and texture on the model, a little bit of shading. It's not going to be too apparent until we matte varnish the model, but before I do that, I want to do a last couple of steps. So the first one is going to be taking some Grim Black speed paint, and what we're going to use this for is to give a layer of this to the weapons and to put into the spaces on the vision blocks. So what I need is a little bit of water here just to thin it down a touch on the weapon barrels at least. Just make it run a bit more easily. So on our autocannons, up here, what I'm aiming to do is not completely obliterate the silver underneath. I'm just trying to shade and darken the whole effect down a little bit. And this also works into the shape of the muzzle brakes and to the ends of the barrels which I've drilled. So we can just add that in there, but we can just apply it over the ends of the barrels like that. So we'll just get on with this, and then we can move on to the next step. With the speed paint down, it's time to move on to our second to last step. Our last step is going to be done off camera, which is just going to be a matte varnish over the whole model. Then we can show you it all complete. We're going to add a little bit of rust, and for this we're going to use Army Painter's Fresh Rust Effects. Now this is a texture paint, but what I will say for it in its defense, and I've used it a few times now on some of my, my other stuff, when it's watered down, it works really well as sort of area rust, kind of just almost pin washing. So if you don't shake the bottle too much, you can avoid the majority of the texture on the paint. And you can see on the palette here just how bright and interesting a color this is. Now it may fade a little bit in amongst all the other details, but what I like to do with this is just let it seep in and move around certain details. And I wanted to do it on this model because we've done it mostly as base primer. Base primer isn't really the most resilient paint around. It's good for keying for other colors to go over the top of it, but it will tend to allow rust to come through a little bit quicker, I think, than something that's had 2 or 3 coats of different colors of paint. So a little bit of rust buildup here and there isn't going to hurt. So I'm just going to follow some lines here, let it gather amongst rivets and stuff like that and panel edges, just to see how it turns out. And if we really feel a little fancy, we can do a little bit of rust streaking. So say along this vision port here, do a little bit around its edge. Maybe if I can show you the brushwork, just take it from a corner and just let it run down like that. So obviously that's not going to be very apparent until we have a matte varnish, and hopefully it'll show up a little bit more, but we can add as much or as little as we want to the model. So we'll get this done, give the whole model a matte varnish, and I typically use ultra matte varnish, so we'll get a very nice flat finish. After that, we'll see the whole model on our little turntable, and we can discuss what we think in the end. With the final details all done and a matte varnish over the top, a couple of layers of ultra matte varnish, that's the AK stuff that I usually use. You'll see that being used in the linebacker as well. Our little Vogelspinne is now complete. I think the weathering has turned out alright. I maybe should have paid a little bit more attention to certain aspects of it, but in general what we have is a nice sort of improvised color scheme with a few replacement parts on the vehicle to make it stand out and look a little bit different. What I did before the matte varnish as well was to paint the antenna in the charred bone that we used earlier, and a little bit of that black speed paint along the bottom just to tidy that up, make it look a little more actually finished. But in general, I think we've got a good looking model. I like the pose I've managed to get from it, that sort of leaning over with the barrels trying to level themselves, maybe at a ground target or something. And in general, I'm quite happy with how it's turned out, and I hope you guys have enjoyed watching it as well. It's one way to get a fairly quick color scheme down on the table, and a nice little model to run around the battlefield and just be a little bit of a menace, hopefully. But thank you so much for watching as always, and until next time, take care, stay safe, and see you again very soon.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now, and while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.